Hey, Marcus.
Hey, what's happening, Gretchen?
So we've known each other over 20 years. I was thinking about that before we got on here. We've known each other over 20 years.
Wow, that's right. Because
Yeah.
you were working with Rich Jacobellis,
Yeah.
who's still my agent. I just got off the phone with Rich a few minutes ago, and so you were helping me get film composer gigs.
And you were teaching me about the other side of the industry, so far as because you were really one of the only clients that I was working with at that time who was regularly recording albums and touring at the same time.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Because you were working mostly with composers,
With
right?
film composers, yeah.
Film
So, yeah, from the very beginning, I saw the full gambit, you
Yep.
know, of
Yeah.
possibilities in a musician's, career and songwriting, obviously, and producing and everything else. You literally had your hands in almost every pot that was out there in the music industry and still do.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
the one thing that I will absolutely say about you, especially over these last 20 years, is the Marcus I met back then is absolutely the Marcus who I'm speaking to today.
Right. Boring then, boring now.
Okay, you as a person,
Right.
Thing, but the stuff you do is cool. No.
All right, there you go.
Absolutely not. No, you are consistently the same, like who you are as a person, or who you communicate yourself to be, and how you interact with other people, both in the business sense, your team, your fans, strangers. It's the same. Everybody's getting the same Marcus Miller, really.
Right.
Right. I can absolutely attest to that. You have not, at least from what I've seen in the last 20 years, you don't have like a different persona for this group versus a different persona for that group. It's one Marcus.
Yeah, that never even occurred to me. I mean, I do have some friends who are who out of necessity have to create a way to deal with their fans, especially like pro athletes,
Yeah.
Because they're so famous and everybody knows them. So when so many people are coming at them, they had to develop this shield, and I've seen really famous artists that I've worked with have to do that. But luckily I've stayed in a place where the people who are my fans are really just cool people. I don't have to kind of guard against that, you know what I mean? So I've been fortunate to be able to not have to develop different personas, Sometimes there's some countries, some cities where I'm way more well-known than others. So sometimes getting off the plane, I have to say, okay, like, who am I in this city? Are there going to be cameras right outside the airport when I come out of the baggage claim, or not, you know what I mean? So, but for the most part, I'm fortunate to be able to stay the same.
In a lot of the work that I do, and certainly when you do a lot of research into psychology of like people developing their persona and determining who their individual is, there's this, theory that Carl Jung put forward that there's two phases in life, right? There's phase one, which is from birth to about, your mid 30s, about 40. And you spend those that first phase developing your public persona. You put yourself out to the world, you show the world your personality trait, you show the world, the unique things about who you are and what you can do. And the world tells you what they like and what they don't like. And you craft your identity based on that feedback, right? Because you need to get along in the world. And then at about 40, you hit what is called midlife crisis, where you realize that there are aspects of yourself that aren't, being put forward in your life, and therefore you're not happy, and you spend the next 20 years, to the time you pass, trying to live authentically, trying to identify those things that were unique to you that you put to the side and try to bring them more forward to be happy in life. And it's been my experience working with creative people in particular that model doesn't really fit the way that you guys, have lived life. I have found that the majority of creative people have their public persona was their authentic self in the fact that they were expressing their true unique gift, their creativity, as early as they possibly could.
Right. I mean, that was what it was for me. I mean, I play music. A lot of music I play is called jazz. You know, it's categorized as jazz, and it's all about self-expression. So you really got to figure out, like you said, what you have to offer early on. But you're really being honest about, you know what I mean? Because can you imagine you walking on stage, 25% of what you're going to play on that stage, you've rehearsed.
Yeah.
The other 75%, you got to make it up on the spot. So you just got to put your heart into it. You got to put your soul into it. You got to work out your insecurities. You got to work out all that stuff really early on, you know? And I know a lot of jazz musicians do have to, at a certain point, especially if they have some success, they have to go, what is it about what I'm doing that's appealing? Why are there so many people in this audience right now?
Yeah.
You know, some musicians really play fast. They have like great technique, and it's very, very clear why people come to see them, you know, and others are great showmen. But a lot of musicians I know, like Herbie Hancock and Wayne Shorter, even Stevie Wonder, I think what they're selling is their spirit.
Yeah.
They go there and people just enjoy their spirit, their sense of creativity, the connection they have to their creative self, and people just vibe off of it. And I think people in the audience go, man, I would love to be able to be that in touch with just things that pass through my head, you know? Like I talked to Wayne Shorter. If you have a conversation with Wayne Shorter, you better be ready. You better put on your seatbelt, because it's kind of like stream of consciousness, but it's all focused to a point. You know what I mean? So, you know, those people, if you ask them a question and they said, I knew a guy once, this is their answer. I knew a guy once. And he tells you this whole story. And it's like a parable that he's telling you. And if you are patient enough to kind of listen to the end, you realize the answer he gave you is way more deeper than a yes or no or a simple explanation, because that's the way he thinks. You know, that's the way his brain works. And a lot of people's brains would work that way if they had the freedom to use it. You know what I mean? But a lot of people aren't in those kind of occupations and not in situations in their life where they're that free to just say whatever's on their mind, or just create whatever it is that they can imagine.
And not worry about the public response to what they're saying. Yeah. Yeah.
And you're very, you know, look, anybody who can create something that comes out of them, out of their soul, and have so many people like it are truly, truly fortunate individuals. You know what I mean? Because just because you like it, just because it's clearly you, doesn't mean that everybody else is going to like it. Doesn't mean that people are going to run and go download it. You know what I mean? That's what makes successful people, creative people special, is because, you know, if, you know, Jay-Z or somebody like that, if they have an idea that just comes to them, they're talented enough to put it in such an artful way, in such a universal way, that it resonates with everybody.
It's interesting to me, especially when you talk, but it's definitely something that I've observed this entire time knowing you. When you say things like that and you give examples and you talk about Wayne Shorter's like this, or Jay-Z is talented enough to take that idea and put it in a universal format to give out to the world, you do the exact same thing. And I noticed that you never publicly acknowledge, you know what I mean, the fact that you are that gifted, and that is what you're communicating out to the public, which is why you have the fan base you have and why you've been successful in the industry for as long as you've been. Do you recognize for yourself that you have that gift, and it's just the humility, you know, that you also possess that doesn't, you know, have you actually openly talk about that?
Well, yeah, you know, like my wife has to remind me, Brenda, she has to remind me, you know what I mean? Yeah. Because it's not my default. And we were just talking about this the other day. She said, you know, you don't default to, your first default is to put other people in front of you, you know what I mean? And I was talking to her about, well, I think in my heart, like in my core, I'm a collaborator, you know what I mean? I worked with Luther Vandross for many years, and we wrote music together. We produced a lot of his records together. Worked with Miles Davis, same thing. David Sanborn wrote stuff for Aretha, for Shaka Khan. But I think that was like the first part of my life. I was a collaborator. And then, Miles passed, unfortunately, tragically, Luther passed, so, I felt like, well, after you play with Miles Davis, who are you going to play with? I guess it's time for me to step out there, but I think my spirit as a collaborator has always kept me from thinking about me all the time.
It's also interesting to me that you see it as thinking of me, all the time, because at the same time, it really is just about, this is a unique talent that you have, that you certainly acknowledge and can see other people having, Stevie Wonder having, you said, it's yours too. Do you ever look at your life? Have you ever had one of those moments where you were playing, in an arena setting, or like I've known you playing for some of the, top people in government all over the world, and have you ever sat there in one of those moments and just kind of went, damn, like they, I'm here, like they asked for me to do this. This is me sharing my gift, which is unique to me. I'm this person.
I really don't come at it that way. You know what I mean? For me, I think I have a unique filter, right? Mm-hmm. In other words, and I think for a lot of artists, it doesn't come from them, right? It just comes through them. Like we're all living the same lives, essentially. You know what I mean? But when the life comes into me and it comes out in a certain way because of my unique filter. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I know that I have ability to translate what I'm feeling and what I'm imagining, to translate it into music. You know what I mean? And I'm certainly appreciative that everybody's out there to check it out. But I never really come at it like, man, all these people are here to see me. I'm here. What I feel like I'm doing is I'm in the joy business. You know what I mean? If I can find some notes with my musicians to have people go, oh yeah, man, this is making me feel a certain way. You know what I mean? Then I'm successful. And it doesn't have to be joy. It could be like pain, and it can be missing somebody who's not here anymore. All those emotions are in the music that I play. So what I'm hoping when I walk onto the stage is that when I walk off the stage, you've gone through this beautiful emotional experience. You know what I mean? It's not just about how fast I play, even though, I want to break off a couple of nice licks, you know what I mean? And have people appreciate my musicianship. But more important to me is to make sure that people are touched by what we do. It sounds corny, but it's important. And there's a lot of bass players who are, practicing, you know what I mean? And they're getting everything together. And then they hit a point where they go, I'm not getting the reaction. Not getting the reaction that I was expecting, And my feeling is like, okay, you've got all the tools. You got the hammers and the nails, but now you got to build a house. You got to create something with all that practicing you did, something that's going to make people feel stuff, because majority of people don't really care how difficult it is to play your diminished and your augmented scales. You know what I mean? Majority of people don't really care. They just know, man, that hit my funny bone right there. Oh, you know what I mean? Or that's making me feel a certain way, or I'm just really glad I'm here to experience this music.
Can you remember, or better put, what is the first memory that you have of realizing that music was something that was, resounding with you at a deeper level?
I'm from a musical family. My father is a piano player, played the organ and the piano, and church every Sunday. His family was a very musical family. Like, they all got together regularly, almost every Sunday to, after church, to perform for each other. You know what I mean? And so music was just it was as natural as life itself for me. You know, I mean, I didn't even think it was special. Mm-hmm. It just seemed to me like, oh, I'm sure this is what everybody does on Sunday, you know? And I didn't even really value it at first. Mm-hmm. You know, I just knew, yeah, Dad's going to have choir rehearsal at the apartment in Brooklyn this evening, you know, and it was just part of life. And then we eventually moved from Brooklyn to Queens. I'm 10 years old. Heard the Jackson 5, lost my mind like every 10-year-old at the time, because this kid who was our age was the lead singer, yeah. And he was amazing. You know what I mean? And we were going, whoa, he looked like us. I mean, you know, as Black kids, you didn't see a whole lot of, you know, of that in 1969 kids on TV who looked like you know what I mean? So it was a big deal. And since I'd already had music in my life, it wasn't a big deal to start to get into that kind of music. Jackson 5, you know, I wanted to start playing R&B music, and they led me to Sly and the Family Stone. Mm. And these are groups that maybe people haven't heard of, but they were like really significant in the early 70s. Funk band, Kool and the Gang, everybody knows Celebrate, which is a hit that people still play these days. But at the beginning, in the 70s, Kool and the Gang was a funk soul band, you know what I mean? And there was a whole bunch of them. Isaac Hayes and War and a group called Manjo. And I got into it. You know, I got into it. First, I was in a singing group, you know, singing Jackson 5 songs. But eventually I moved to the music side because, like I said, I realized I had a head start than all the other guys in the neighborhood because I already had music in my life. I already knew how to read music. I already knew about the fundamentals of music. I played the piano from a young age because I'm just imitating Dad. Never really took formal lessons. And then New York school system offered the clarinet. They offered the trumpet and the drums, but my father wasn't trying to hear the trumpet or the drums in our apartment, you know. And so I played the clarinet. Clarinet leads you to saxophone. They're very similar, you know. So I was playing the horns. And then my buddy got a bass for Christmas when I was about 12. We were either 12 or 13. He got a bass for Christmas. And I played those first couple of notes and said, nah, this is what I'm talking about, you know. Because, again, it's the 70s, you know. These days, you know, the bass is just like, but back in the 70s, you know, boom, 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 like the bass was carrying the soul of the song. It had its own voice, yeah. Yeah, it had its own voice, exactly. So I really focused on that. I stayed with the clarinet in school, so I got my formal education with the clarinet, but I was in the funk bands in the neighborhood in Jamaica, Queens, New York. And so to answer your question, you know, as soon as I started playing some stuff on the bass, it didn't seem that special to me, but I saw people reacting to it. That's a really nice feeling, especially if you're 13 years old. You know what I mean? Oh, wow. You like this? You know what I mean? Let me practice. Let me learn some more, you know? And I think as an artist, especially as a musician, you go through phases. Like the first phase is the joy of just making the sound from the instrument, which is what drew me to the bass. I was like, wow, this is really cool. And then second phase is you see people react, you know, and you go, wow, that's really nice, you know? And then like there's the third phase is it gives you, what's the word? Like recognition, you know? And, you know, if you're coming up in a certain neighborhood, it's basketball, you know what I mean? Sports or music, you know what I mean? And so like I'm walking down the street in Jamaica, Queens, and I got to pass by the ice cream shop where all the homies are standing in front, you know, and I'm 13, they're 17, they about to take my lunch money or whatever they do, you know? And then they go, wait, oh, that's the little bass player man who played in the township. Oh, let him go. That's valuable.
Yeah, that's currency.
I think I'm gonna play this bass a little bit more, you know. Then eventually, the things that you could create with music, you know, is exciting. And then you start to realize, or at least for me, I began to realize what music can do for people. You know, like that's a whole nother level. You know, when you write songs and people come to you and tell you, man, this song got me through a difficult time in my life. this song helped us in a country where we were oppressed. It gave us strength. You know, I've had all sorts of experiences like that. You know, hey, this is my son. I named him Marcus because your music was so important to me at the time that he was born. It's crazy. You know what I mean? And so it goes from being me, and then it starts to get bigger and less about you and more about, I mean, it's still you who's kind of getting stuff started, but you're trying to kind of bring a community together.
I've been blessed enough to witness not only you, but other creative people that I've worked with when inspiration hits. And it can hit in the most unlikely moments, in the most unlikely ways. And with you in particular, I've remember watching, you know, instances where you will literally be mid-conversation with somebody and something happens. Obviously, you know, I have no idea what it is, but something happens and you literally.
Yeah, usually like my head starts popping, you know what I mean? Something jumped in my head. Yeah, but that's like, I'm sure everybody goes through that. But creative people have learned to really pay attention to it.
Yes.
And to honor it, you know?
At what point do you feel that started happening for you, where maybe things were originally just what you characterize as, oh, that's a random idea or a musical thought that's in my head versus, oh, hello, let me pay attention to what's happening?
I think first, you know, your first songs that you write, then, you know, the inspiration is really clear. You know what I mean? It's right there in you from whatever melodies you've been collecting as a child through your whole first, I don't know, 15 years, you know? But then as you become a songwriter or composer and you have to come up with stuff on a regular basis, and you're in a music business where you can't just sit around and wait till some really obvious idea comes, you learn to start really paying attention, you know? And basically you have a little idea suitcase, and whenever, you know, you're walking down the street and something hits you, you know, what I do is I write it down in imaginary music paper so I can see it. So it'll remind me when I see the notes, what I was thinking at the time. That's how I used to do it. Now I just pick up the phone and sing the melody into the phone recorder, right? But you end up with a suitcase of ideas, little snippets that might trigger something. So that way, when it's time for you to come up with something like on the spot, you don't have to start from zero. You know what I mean? You can just go, oh, this will work. You know what I mean? And some really good songs have come that way because the inspiration, it's basically a box of inspiration, you know, a box of things that just hit me. It's not literally a box, but you know what I mean? It's just a collection of ideas.
When you were younger, and I'll tell you where the parallel is that I'm drawing with this. When I originally talked about that phase 1 and phase 2 of, you know, the personality development, you know, people trying to live authentically. And in that phase 1, a lot of what happens is they put themselves out there, they get the public feedback, and that helps craft their persona. For musicians in particular, putting yourselves out there isn't necessarily how you talk or carry yourself, it's your music. You putting your music out there and getting feedback from the public. Did you, at that earlier phase in your career, were you really listening to the public feedback? Was it altering music that you were putting out?
Yeah, because you know, I was learning all sorts of different styles to play the bass. You know, sometimes you play it with your fingers and you pluck the bass like that. Sometimes you play it softly with your thumb. Sometimes you bang that sucker with your thumb. You know what I mean? Larry Graham, who played bass with Sly and Family Stone, he popularized that. And there was a guy named Louis Johnson who did it too. And I came up in New York City, right? I came up in an era, most people weren't trying to hear jazz. Okay, so we show up, you know, some young teenagers playing jazz, and, you know, the people are talking through it, you know what I mean, and waiting for whatever the next act is going to be. But man, if I started thumping that sucker and playing physically, all of a sudden people quieted down. and they started paying attention. So even though I valued both styles of playing, and I still play both ways, I knew when I got to get people's attention that I can do that. And I became known for doing that. You know what I mean? And I don't mind because I love it. But and everybody in the first 20 years of my life, my musical life, they all knew Marcus plays that, Marcus does that. He does all the styles, you know. But in the YouTube age, which is the last, I guess, 15 to 20 years, you know, people put up YouTube videos of you playing, right? And the people who have the time in their life to put up videos are usually young. They're like, you know, 15 years old. And the stuff that's going to appeal to a 15-year-old, especially when it comes to my playing, is when I'm just flailing and thumping and slapping the bass. You know what I mean? Yeah. So if you go to YouTube and you look up me, that's what you're going to see. You know what I mean? And so now it's a thing where if you come to my concert, you get a full range of playing. But if you just watch YouTube, you think I'm just this guy. You know what I mean? So when I go to a concert, there are people who expect me to do that the whole show. But at this point, I'm like, I'm going to do some of that, but I have to introduce you to some other stuff. You know what I mean? So in terms of the people's reaction to you and you kind of modifying what you do, I had some of that. But at this point, it's I want to give you what you want, but I also want to give you what you need also.
Yeah, referring to giving people what they need. You know, do you consider yourself a vessel? Do you consider yourself a receiver of messages, let's even say from spirit, or, you know, some greater force that you then, as you said, put through your special filter to communicate out?
Yeah, I think that you know, particularly if you're playing like jazz or certain types of R&B, you know, your job is to carry the tradition through you. You know what I mean? This is a tradition that started, you know, back in West Africa, and then went through like the whole slave experience, which turned into blues and gospel and soul and R&B and rock and roll and funk and hip hop. So, you know, if you're a jazz musician, there's no written rule, but most of us feel a responsibility to have some of the history evident in what we're playing. You know what I mean? So if you hear me play, you're going to hear some Bootsy. You're going to hear some Ron Carter, who used to play with Miles Davis in the 60s. You're going to hear some Paul Chambers, who played with Miles in the 50s. You're going to hear the story, because that's part of our job, is just to keep that story going. And then, you know, all of us are inspired by what we see, what we hear, what we feel. And so we carry that. I personally feel a responsibility to bring positivity and hopefulness and to people, because I think that's necessary. And I also want to make them go, when you hear something funky, you know, that face you make.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't know what category that falls in, but it's very important.
We'll call that the peak experience.
Yeah, there you go.
Exactly. Exactly. So when did you start playing professionally? How old were you?
14, 15. You know, if professionally means the first time you got paid, yeah, yes. It's probably, you know, 14 or 15. You know what I mean? It's $20, but you know, it's $20 I didn't have before I played. You know?
The moment you knew that you could make money doing it. Yeah.
What'd you say?
I said it's that moment you knew you could make money doing this. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, and you know, because I'm from New York, right, born and raised, I had an advantage, because a lot of people, if you come from the Midwest, you come from anywhere besides New York or LA, or maybe certain styles of music, Nashville. If you come from any of those, outside of those places, you have to finish whatever education you're going to have. Then you got to move to New York or LA. At least that was the deal when I was coming through. You got to find a job to support yourself while you try to make a name for yourself in the city. You know what I mean? For me, because I was living in New York, I was born in New York, I got started really early. So I was doing gigs here. Like I said, I'm 14 years old. I'm already doing gigs. By the time I finished with my college education, I was already on the scene. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so a lot of that work was already done. So I never had to wait tables or do burgers or stuff like that. I mean, my version of doing burgers was playing at a Polynesian supper club called the Hawaii Kai. You know what I mean? We weren't playing anything fancy or special. We were playing, you know, what people wanted to hear when they were having dinner. Girl from Ipanema, you know, Wave, you know, we were playing all those, you know, standard songs. And we got paid. So it was a real job, but it wasn't like a really super musically challenging job. But so that was kind of like my work before I started doing like records and things that I consider more creative.
And so when you, especially in the earlier parts of your career, as you said, you were doing a lot of collaboration, you were working with other artists, both playing on their recordings, right? And then you were doing some producing, you were doing some songwriting, you know, both giving them your songs and working on songs with them. And then you're touring, you're out, so you're living your life as a full-time musician, right? Experiencing the world, learning about everything. And then at what age did you start having children?
We had our first son, John, in 89. So I was 30, almost 30.
So 15 years of this, you know, life on the road, this career, and I mean, pretty much living the dream of a lot of musicians, right? When people want to be a professional musician, you were literally doing the majority of things that they would say they wanted to do. I want to tour, I want to record, I want to work with greats, I want to, you know, now you have
I was doing all of that except for the touring part. I mean, I would do tours from time to time, but I did it kind of backwards because I started as a studio musician, you know, from about 17, 18, I was in the studios of New York playing for whoever needed bass. And, you know, I did like 5 or 6 years of just going from studio to studio playing on people's records. And so I didn't tour much. And then I went from there to producing. So I was producing records with Luther Vandross and producing stuff for Shaka Khan and producing stuff for EU, you know what I mean? A whole bunch of producing jobs. So I didn't have like everything you named, like producing and playing on records and playing with great artists, absolutely. But my life was still pretty stable, you know what I mean? Because I wasn't running around the planet going from gig to gig, you know what I mean? So what happened was I met my wife Brenda in 82, you know, and I was with Miles at the time, but I quickly settled in to working in the studios, which is almost like having a regular job. The hours were still nuts, you know what I mean? Still coming home at 2 in the morning, stuff like that. But it wasn't so crazy. So I ended up, and I credit a lot of my longevity to being married and having Brenda have me address the rest of life. You know what I mean? Besides just playing notes, you know what I mean? Like the rest of life was there for me. And I think so many ways that you can appreciate the rest of life and how much it can add to your creativity. For example, I learned how regular people listen to music, right? Like I'm sitting there going, you know, we got to make sure the hi-hats and the shakers match, you know, all this kind of really detailed stuff. And, you know, Brenda would go, okay, that's not what people are hearing, you know. First thing they're hearing is the tone of Luther's voice. Oh yeah, that's true, isn't it? You know, they're listening to the song, listen to the whole thing. So all of a sudden, you know, that becomes valuable, you know, when you're a musician, but it really becomes valuable when you're a producer, right? Because musician, you can just play your instrument, you know what I mean? Stuff is happening around you, but you're focused here. When you're a producer, your job is to create a sound, help create a sound that sounds like a whole interesting thing, you know what I mean? So when a lot of musicians were starting to fall off because their style changed, the style of music changed, and they weren't adapting, because I had my eyes open as a producer, you know what I mean? That really enabled me to make transitions, you know.
Did your family then, I mean, especially having, you know, being married and then having children, was that really almost like the way that you connected your very internal life? Because I mean, life as a musician is you're in a room, you're writing, you're here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, having those ties outside of yourself, did that really help you stay open to everybody else and stay more connected?
That was the whole thing. That was the whole thing. Just coming up from here to coming to there, coming from what you feel is the most important thing to being a husband and a dad, where, you know, it comes maybe fourth or fifth in the priority list. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's important. You know what I mean? It's important. It grounds you, it stabilizes you. You see how music works in the world, you know? You see how music can help, you know, like, you know, you ask my kids who are like 32, 30, 28, and 27 now, you know, you ask them, you know, I had some crazy songs that I made up while we're driving to school. You know what I mean? Like music it kept you in touch with what music means to people, you know? Like I think the nursery school that our kids went to, I think they still use the song that I put together as the school theme song. You know what I mean? And it's cool to have a hit record. It's also cool to see a bunch of 4 and 5-year-olds singing your song. You know what I mean? It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's interesting. Before we started recording, I was talking to you about what a peak experience is and how in transpersonal psychology, we consider peak experiences as those moments where, whether you want to call it the universe or the greater power or spirit, kind of alters the trajectory, you know, of your life so that you can stay on the course, you know, that your soul's purpose in this life. You were just mentioning how you knew people who stayed a musician and stayed in the box and stayed internal. And you, at that moment, you know, where you had gotten married, started having children, that changed the trajectory, changed your focus,
Absolutely.
and it made you a better producer and therefore added to your longevity.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
If I had gone the route of a lot of my contemporaries at the time, you know, it would have been a different story. Absolutely. You know what I mean? But having the stability, having the love, not you're nominated for a Grammy, you know, you didn't win. I've seen guys who were devastated, devastated. You know what I mean? I'm like, I go home, you know, life is life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Life is life, and it's wonderful, and you're blessed. You know what I mean? So I mean, I can't tell you how many people who didn't have that, how many great artists who didn't have that, suffered because they lived and died with what happened in the music business.
Yeah. And nothing outside of it.
You want to be susceptible. You don't want to be vulnerable to the twists and turns of the music business, which lots of times doesn't have anything to do with who you are or your value, you know?
Or even your music, even your musical ability.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially your musical ability. You know what I mean? It'll make you feel like, you know, you put out a record and you feel great about it and it doesn't sell. You know what I mean? You could blame that on yourself if you're not centered.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like Luther Vandross was exactly the opposite. He was like, look, the record was bad, okay? They just didn't do their job, you know, to let people know it exists. I mean, look, and when we're talking about Luther, we're not talking about it didn't sell. We're like, it didn't sell 3 million records. It sold 2.5 or whatever it was. You know what I mean? So it was, you know, he didn't have much. But I mean, originally, Luther, you know, he had trouble getting a record deal, you know, back in the early days before he became a household name. You know what I mean? But he was so confident about who he was. And it was deep, you know what I mean? Because, you know, he was a big guy, you know what I mean? So it wasn't like he was going to be up on stage twirling like Michael Jackson, you know what I mean? He felt like my voice is my gift and I'm going to present that clearly and without distractions, you know? A lot of record company execs didn't get it. One did. His name was Larkin Arnold. Larkin signed Luther, and Luther's first record went platinum. So it wasn't like it took a long time. You know what I mean? It was just,
confirmation.
And his confidence is what his sense of who he was, his sense of what I have to offer is really valuable. It would never waver.
How much of that, especially that experience working with him and seeing that, did you carry with you as you started going solo?
I recognize it. I can't say that I'm as strong about it as he is. You know, I will say, okay, what could I have done differently? You know, but I do know that once I've gone through it, first thing I do is I play the record again and go, oh, no, this is bad. This is good. You know what I mean? But my first reaction was, oh man, is there something I could have done differently? And again, I told you, like, Brenda's beyond me about that. You know what I mean? Like, no, don't default to, something you could have done. You know what I mean? It's important, you know? Now, some people can go the other way too far, and just say, what I do is fantastic. And, it might not be the case. Yeah. You know what I mean? So the other gift is, and not everybody can do this, is to be able to telescope out and look at yourself with some kind of objectivity, some kind of perspective. Yeah. How do I appear to other people, especially if I'm trying to sell myself to other people? What can I do differently? Criticism. Is there any of this criticism that has any value? If I can detach my emotional reaction to the criticism and just go, that's something I might want to think about next time. You know what I mean? It's very difficult to do, because most critics are really not evaluating your work. They're just trying to prove how cool they are, or how incisive they are, or how snarky they can be. You know what I mean? It's really about them. You learn more about the critic than the music or the art that the critic is analyzing. You know what I mean? So it's hard to pull out information that you can use out of that situation, but you can. You know what I mean? But you can't lose yourself. You can't lose who you are. You know what I mean? And I think that's one of the big tricks.
Absolutely. When we first met, you were a film composer. You were actively, scoring for film and television. You were touring at that point. You had just released M Squared, I think it was, at the time, right? Huge album. And you had all 4 children. I think at that point they were almost teenagers, just about. So, they're in early developmental ages there.
They were like 12 down to 8 years old. Yeah.
Yeah. And your songwriting, you were producing, you were, like I said, composing, you were touring, you were father, and everything, at least from the outside view, me watching in particular, everything was here, everything was high, everything was good. You know what I mean? Like it seemed like you were reaching the levels that you were aiming for. If you had a target, you were hitting it. I'm not saying it was easy to hit it, but if you had a target, you were hitting it. And then around that same time, I know that your mother passed. And watching you, personally, that you didn't share a ton about it at the time, but it definitely, had a major impact on you. And I'm wondering, looking back on that now that you've had, a couple, almost a couple decades to really see how that may have impacted, your trajectory at the time, or whether it's how you viewed yourself or what was happening in your life. Do you see any influence, like any major influences that had in changing your course?
Well, like you said, it was really difficult, you know what I mean? And I'm sure I felt a little bit untethered for a while, you know what I mean? Because, you know, losing your mom is losing your mom, you know. I know I also felt tremendously grateful that I had what I felt like was a beautiful relationship with my mom, and that I didn't have any regrets about my relationship with my mom or my dad. My dad passed a couple of years ago. I didn't have any regrets about my relationship, you know, with them. So at least that wasn't there, you know, stuff that you can't fix.
Yeah.
You know, and I know and I had my own family, you know what I mean? I had my family, which was huge, you know. Brenda and the kids was huge support through that time, you know. And then I was doing a concert somewhere, and a lady after the show came up to me and says, "Oh yeah, I see your mother on your shoulder." And I said, "Yeah, right." She says, she says that Nikki needs some extra attention right now. Did I mention that my daughter's name was Nikki to you? You know, and who knows what that is? But what I do know is that, true or not, that's a really lovely way to walk around, feeling like she's right here with me, you know, smacking me in my head when I don't do something right, you know what I mean? But mostly supporting, you know. My mom was like, you know, she was like a Black mom, you know. She'd go to a wedding, you know, they'd have a wedding reception, and the wedding reception would have a band. And she'd go to the side of the bandstand, tap the bass player. "You know who my son is? Marcus Miller." And, you know, everybody knows how moms are, you know, especially in the Black community. "Hey, fella, this is Marcus's mom. Hey, Mr. Miller." And it was all beautiful, you know what I mean? But that's who my mom was, you know. So it was, she was always super supportive, you know. And that's probably, like when you talk about peak experiences, Brenda and the family, but also having two parents who expected nothing but greatness from you, period. You know, what's greatness? You know, well, you're going to go to college. I mean, you know, it was kind of what solid middle class parents would expect from you, but they didn't expect anything less. You know what I mean? And they were always there, you know, and that's a peak experience. You know what I mean? Coming from, and I didn't recognize it as that until I started talking to other people about their experiences, you know, and all of a sudden I realized, wow, man, you know, you were blessed, you know, you were very fortunate, you know. That's a peak experience, you know, to have a father who valued education. You know, my dad went to the service, into the Navy. He was very young. He had Bruce, my brother, and myself, and he went back to college to get his degree. So he's driving the F train. You know, I don't remember which it was, driving the F train all day and then going to night classes to get his degree, you know what I mean? And playing the organ. You know, he was always on the go, you know what I mean? And you don't realize how much that's affecting you, but that's what you're seeing, you know? So I'm always moving, you know, I'm always moving. I got 4 or 5 things going on at the same time at all times, you know? And I think that's probably an influence from my dad. You know, he's a West Indian man. You know, he had 3 jobs at least. 3 jobs, man.
So you were slacking if you didn't have 5.
Man, you lazy man. You got 2 jobs.
I know for me, when I had my daughter, it definitely kind of turned my life, you know, in like a 90-degree turn. Definitely all for the better, you know, but in particular because she introduced me to a way of life and thinking that I otherwise wouldn't have been exposed to, which is she is neurodiverse. And so I've had to look at the world through a lens I never would have ever perceived it, both to aid her, but in the process, I've learned, a ton. And it's opened me in ways where I now feel like I'm able to share my unique talents, in ways that I never would have imagined before. You have 4 children and all very different from what I remember. And I'm sure it continues, on in all in different avenues and aspects of life. In what ways have your children kind of opened your view, or had you see the world differently given the directions that they've gone?
Well, the first thing is that, and I tell people, like dads who are about to have children, like their wives are pregnant or something like that. I go, it's going to be like before you had a kid and after you had a kid. I mean, it's going to be 2 separate chapters of your life. Dads who just had a kid, I say, you forgot what you were living for before that, didn't you? And they go, man, I'm telling you, I did. I have a whole new sense of purpose, and that's what happened to me. I think that it really connects you no matter how far into creative land you are. I think it really, at least for me, it really helped kind of ground me, you know what I mean? And so that I didn't get too far out there, I didn't start to think of myself in a certain way, the way a lot of artists think about themselves, because, I had to come home, man, and Brenda would be like, let me tell you what happened today. You know what I mean? And then we see, like, this is real life, and then you're really more appreciative that you get a chance that everybody else doesn't get to do. You get a chance to escape into this world that you can create, that you have control over. You can write the songs that you want to play, and you can create the emotions you want to experience, because you realize so much in life you don't have control over. When you have kids, that's always apparent,
I was going to say, each child at this point in time, has definitely shown you that they have their own unique personality and their unique gifts. And as their father, I'm sure you can see the ways that they're sharing those gifts, out to the world and having an impact. If you look at each child, have you in particular seen life in a different way based on the lens that they're now, showing it to you?
Yeah, absolutely. One of them learned, like you said, in an auditory sense better, more than in kind of a visual or, well, let's see, a visual. She learns visually much better than she learns in an auditory way, So I had to, luckily, I think I find myself very flexible in terms of that stuff. You know what I mean? So I said, okay, we're going to find a different way to teach you stuff, and it was, and I'm very playful. So it was always fun, you know what I mean? And, but it made me value that flexibility. You know what I mean? Oh, you're this way. Okay. Let's see if we can find a fun way to deal with and to maximize who you are. That really was like the way I looked at it. One liked to debate, like, debate, you know what I mean? Dinner's been over for 2 hours, we're still debating whatever it is, you know what I mean? But I would, challenge him, to back up his beliefs with facts, blah, blah, blah. So, you know what I mean? So, my goal was just to stay like 6 months smarter than my kids while they were.
But it's really interesting.
Didn't always do it.
What you're describing as flexibility is exactly what you would describe as a musician as the ability to improvise.
Yes.
You're a jazz musician. That improvisation was your bread and butter,
Right.
So being able is really awesome to see that, you know, a skill set that is so valuable in that musical part, one of those unique gifts that you had, you know, was something that you could translate into the other aspects of your life and use that gift to help and share in ways that weren't related to music at all.
And then I was really lucky because the one thing that that I couldn't provide because of what I did was super consistency. Like, you know, I'd be on the road, you know, or I'd be in the studio to all hours. So luckily, Brenda was, you know, holding it down. You know what I mean? You can imagine with 4 kids, that was nuts. You know what I mean? But she did such a good job that somebody said to one of our sons, must have been really hard with your dad, you know, traveling and doing all this. And, you know, and he said, never thought about that. Wow. You know, Brenda kicked ass, you know what I mean? And I feel like when I did come, it wasn't, I tried not to make it, oh, it's a big deal, Dad's home, you know, just tried to get in the cut quickly as I could, you know, and make it seem natural, you know. Shoot, man, I was at like Little League baseball games with my suitcases in the dugout, you know what I mean? Because I just come from the airport, you know, just tried to make it, you know, not have them have to deal with the details of what I have to do, just be there, you know.
And you were a father fully when you were there to be the father. You know, when you were a musician on stage, you were fully a musician on stage. And what you're saying is what made that 100% possible in this world was the fact that you had a brilliant partner.
Right. Exactly. Right. Who wasn't resentful, you know what I mean? Because, and I tell a lot of musicians, I tell a lot of creative people, you know, if it's a guy, I'll say, hey, do you think this is what your partner dreamed about?
Yeah.
When they were thinking about finally being married or something like that? Do you think was their dream? They're doing a lot of, adjusting, right? Because they fell in love with this creative person who's up all night and traveling and all that, you know? So if you can look at it that way, you can become more appreciative, you know? And, you know, I just tell them, you don't want to be that artist who, when the kids get to be 17, 18, 19, 20, start making YouTube videos about you.
You don't want the Mommy Dearest autobiography.
Exactly.
Coming out about you at the end of the day, for real. Well, and that's kind of the whole, you know, point of finding that balance, you know, in life. And sometimes people think that finding balance is just about finding it in yourself, which obviously is important. That's important for your personal sanity. But true balance is being able to find partnerships, whether it's with, you know, a romantic partner, whether it's with, you know, family, children, business people, etc. But it's that when they say it takes a village for everything.
Yeah. Balance is the key to everything, you know. Like, there's not many times where something all the way at the end of a spectrum is the answer, whether it's here or there. It's not many times where that's true. From what I've experienced, the truth isn't here. You know what I mean? Like, you have one news station who's just blabbing about this side of the spectrum. You have the other one who's blabbing about this side. And it's not going to ever work. They're just going to make money just espousing their little, you know, right wing or left wing ideas. But the truth is usually here. You know what I mean? Yeah, you're wrong about this, but you actually have a point about that. And same here, you know, and unfortunately, the interesting thing is the middle is not very interesting. You know what I mean? It's a lot of fun to hear people arguing extremes, but balance is the key, trying to find value in both sides.
And also, I feel trying to find balance even when you are determining purpose for things that you do. Like, for example, I 100%, I can say this for a fact, I don't think you've ever written an album saying, I'm writing an album to win a Grammy. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
you don't set yourself forward. You don't, neither the expectation or the purpose behind the action. You know, your
right.
intention is never based in an extreme. I'm doing this
right.
to make millions. I'm doing this to be famous. I'm doing, you know, your intentions are based in the balance, which is, I'm doing this because it makes me happy and I hope it makes other people happy. And,
right. And that's, you know, I think that's kept me going.
mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I don't think you can ever, well, I'm sure some people can. I know people who do, matter of fact, who go, this one's going to win a Grammy. You know what I mean? But I've met the people on the Grammy board. Okay. They have opinions that I agree with, opinions I don't agree with. You know what I mean? You can't have that as your final, like the determinative factor of whether you make good music or not. You know, you have to make music that you believe in, make art that you believe in. Sometimes it's going to resonate, sometimes it won't. You don't have control over that. You know, you don't have control of how the world will accept your art. And you have to accept that some people are just blessed because, you know, I mean, the thing with some of the artists I work with is if they liked it, there's a good chance there are a lot of people who are going to like it, you know, and you just means you grew up, maybe it's because you grew up right in the middle of the crowd, you know what I mean? Like you weren't on the outskirts where you were a loner and you didn't love the things that everybody else loved, okay? That's great. You'll probably come up with something unique and outside the box. But if you grew up in the center of the group and you like it, you can be pretty sure that's what DJs do. Yeah. You know, DJs know what everybody's going to like. You know what I mean? We had a couple of DJs do remixes on my music. And the first thing they do is take out all the things that I thought made it cool. You know what I mean? All the things that made it unique. Oh, yeah, we don't need that. Boom, tap, boom, boom, tap, boom, boom. There we got it. There it is. People are going to love it. You know, people are going to love it. So there are different ways to make art. You know what I mean? And some people pass judgment on people who make music for the masses. Okay. Which I think is ridiculous, okay? Because in my opinion, music's first purpose before anything else is to unite a community. That's what music was put on this planet for people to sing songs together and unite in their culture, in their values, you know what I mean? In church congregations and village get-togethers, that's what music's for. You know, in Africa, you had the drummers. They weren't drumming to show you how cool their polyrhythms were. They were drumming so that the whole community could dance in unison and feel that sense of unity. You know what I mean? So anybody who tries to put down music that does that, I think they miss the true, you know, essence, the true purpose of music. Now, of course, music has evolved and you have situations where it's a concert hall and you have this artist who's going to bestow you with their wonderful art and you sit there as a passive listener. Okay. But I think that came later. I think that came later. And I think that's a secondary aspect of music. I think the first aspect of music is to get everybody involved. That's why there's nothing like hearing everybody sing the same words. Mm-hmm. It's nothing like hearing everybody sing the same chant at one of them European soccer games. You know what I mean? That's the most powerful sound you're ever going to hear, you know? And that's what music can do. So again, for me, I find my balance. I try to create songs that everybody knows the words to. I also try to find songs that might make you think a little bit, might stretch you a little bit.
If you had to, and not to put you on the spot, but I'm looking definitely more for like the gut instinct, you know, free-flowing thought response to this. If I asked you, what's your purpose in life? What's your response?
My purpose is to bring joy and perspective to the people's, to the lives of people around. Joy doesn't always mean just happy kind of surface joy, but just, I want to be somebody who's fun to be around, but not in a surfacey way. You know, maybe I'll say something to make you think, maybe I'll play something More importantly, it'll make you think, make you feel, make you be appreciative. You know, maybe, you know, you'll watch my life and go, okay, that aspect of his life is inspiring to me. You know, I mean, I'm not perfect at all. So don't copy everything. But, you know, there might be something that you see that you go, okay, that's inspiring. And I think that's my purpose. Not, you know, I think a lot of people have that purpose, you know.
And what do you think is unique about you that aids you in that purpose?
I think what's unique is that I can see things from a lot of different angles. If you believe horoscopes, I'm a Gemini, so I can do that and then go. I mean, sometimes I'll argue a point that I don't even necessarily believe in just to make you stretch, you know, to see if you can see things from a different side, you know. And then I'll stop and go, wait, I don't even believe what I'm saying. Okay, never mind. You know what I mean? But it's just trying to stay mentally flexible.
And then musically, how do you think that ability to see things from multiple perspectives and communicate that effectively, how do you think that that's been demonstrated in your music? Can you think of particular songs or albums where you feel like, yeah, that's me definitely showing you both sides of a coin?
Well, it's more just like the way my career works. Like I'll produce somebody, and my job is to help them express their voice, right? It's not about me as much as it is creating a setting where they can really express themselves, right? Or a movie score, it's the same thing. I'm trying to help the director express his view. So the music I'm writing is not all about me. Music I'm writing is to help the director tell the story he wants. The director will say to you, this dude just killed 14 people, but I want you to like him, okay? And my job is to write something to make, I don't know why, but something about him I like, you know? And that's my job. And then I do other records where it's really about what I'm feeling and I want people to know. Like I wrote a song called Gore, which is an island off Senegal, where they used to stockpile slaves before they sent them into slavery. I was really moved by the experience and I wrote a song about it. And I would perform it. And before the song, I would explain what the song was about, how moved I was. So it was very personal, you know what I mean? And people said they were moved. Matter of fact, people from UNESCO were in the audience when I did it in Paris and invited me to be a UNESCO artist for peace and be the spokesperson for their Slave Root project, which is just kind of making people aware of the history of slavery, stuff like that. You know what I mean? So just being able to be flexible and recognize when it's time for me to assert my voice and recognize when it's time to be a collaborator and a supporter. I think that's how it manifests.
Do you feel that you understood your voice early in your career, or do you feel that that's something you came to later?
I've been that guy forever. I started being able to articulate it maybe 10, 15 years ago. You know what I mean? But I recognize when I look back on my career, yeah, I've always been that guy. You know what I mean? I played on commercials for Huggies diapers, and then I'd walk 10 blocks to the next studio and play on a Miles Davis record. You know what I mean? One time I was on one session and the guy hired me for another session in the same studio, and I'd record one song, and while they were taking a coffee break, I'd run upstairs and play on the other guy's record. And it was two completely different styles of music. You know what I mean? So I was always changing heads. You know, I was in the Saturday Night Live band when Eddie Murphy was there. And, so I was always doing a million things, but I had the ability to switch very quickly.
Have you always felt comfortable being that flexible? I know a lot of people say change is hard, right? Change is hard for me. I can't just change how I feel, how I think, how I communicate on a dime. Certainly not, for some people, it's like they can't go from 1 minute writing, sitting down to say, I'm going to write today. And then, 2 hours later, have to turn that off and immediately go, handle dinner with the kids, and then come right back to sit down and write again. Right. Have you been comfortable doing that kind of transitions, or was that hard for you?
No, I've always been comfortable doing that. Matter of fact, if I wasn't doing that, that's when I got uncomfortable. like doing the same thing every day in the same pattern is difficult for me. So I work on consistency. You know what I mean? I work on when there's an opportunity to be consistent, I really try to focus in on it because it doesn't come naturally to me.
And how do you feel when you're focused? Because, for example, there's focus where you can still, kind of, and then there's hyper focus where somebody literally has to scream your name when they're 2 inches from you, to bring you back.
Well, I was writing a song in the studio. Normally I try to write music when I'm not in the studio because studio time is expensive, you know what I mean? At least back when I was doing this. But I was working on a song and I was getting there, you know what I mean? So it was, like 10 o'clock when we started in the morning and I was working on it. And it took me a couple of hours to get it right, you know what I mean? So I said, okay, I think this is right. And I said to the engineer, we should maybe think about getting some lunch. She said, Marcus, it's 10 p.m. Okay. And I realized, okay, I had no sense of time or space or anything. And that's why I have a headache because I haven't eaten all day. You know what I mean? But you can get there, and I know a lot of artists can get there where you just get into this space and time slows down or whatever it does, whatever happens, but you lose all sense of time.
How do you keep a balance with that though? Because at the same time, you can't, given everything that you have going on in your life, you can't hyper focus like that on the daily. You know what I mean? I highly doubt you would still have the wife or kids and the 3 other careers. So what are some of the things that you have done? What is it, you have other people help, or have there been certain tricks that you've come up with that kind of...
Yes, both. I have other people help. I've had assistants who say, it's time, to get some food, or I recognize that when I get to a certain point, anything I do after that point, I'm going to probably redo the next day because I've hit my creative limit. And now I'm just coming up with things that are probably going to make the song not as good. You know what I mean? So I've recognized that point. So that's when I'll call home and say, I'm done. That's when I say, okay, I'm done. Anything I do after this is going to mess the song up. So let me get out of here. And that's something I had to develop.
So for you, because as you said, you feel something's off when you're not juggling all the balls in the air. Does that then mean, do you kind of look, when you're looking forward in your life, most people look forward to retirement, when they can put all the balls down and kind of unplug. Have you ever looked at life that way, or do you just kind of say, I'm doing this until this just doesn't feel right anymore?
Most people don't get to do what they love and do that as their career and their livelihood. So a lot of people are finally looking to dedicate their life to what they love, whatever that is. Some people like to travel. I've been traveling, for me, the vacation was not getting on a plane. You know what I mean? So, I look at people like Quincy Jones. I look at Herbie Hancock, and they've been doing what they've been doing because they can't imagine anything more cool.
Sir Professor, are there any spiritual practices, things such as meditation, yoga, journaling that you engage in on a regular basis to kind of keep yourself balanced?
Yoga. I do meditation. I exercise, workout. The yoga and meditation, none of it's consistent. You know what I mean? Like, I do it when I say, oh, you know what? I think it's time to slow down, But the exercising, I'm pretty consistent with that. And, I used to tell my kids when there was this one hill that we'd go over. And when you got to the top of the hill, the view was beautiful, right? And every time, and it was like on the way home, every time we pass it, I said, do we all appreciate this? It's beautiful, right? And if you drive them over that hill today, I'm sure they have the same thought. You know what I mean? And I think that's a That's all you can do.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you, Marcus, so much. Thank you for taking this time. I really appreciate it.
No problem at all. No problem at all.